The first time Kira saw Marcus Chen, she was barely 14 cycles old by her species standards, though she looked much younger to human eyes. The Altarian delegation had arrived at the Terran diplomatic station orbiting Jupiter, and she had wandered away from the formal proceedings drawn by curiosity about the strange bipedal creatures that had somehow managed to spread across half the galaxy in just a few centuries. Marcus was 25, then a junior engineer working on the station's atmospheric recycling systems. He was crouched behind a maintenance panel, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he concentrated on rewiring a faulty circuit. Kira had never seen anything like him before. Her people, the Altarians, were tall and willowy with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that dominated their faces. Marcus was compact and sturdy with warm brown skin and eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience despite his youth. She watched him work for nearly an hour, marveling at the dexterity of his fingers and the quiet intensity of his focus. When he finally noticed her standing there, he nearly dropped his tools. "You shouldn't be here alone, kid," he said gently. "Where are your parents or guardians?" Kira felt something flutter in her chest at the sound of his voice. It was deeper than Altarian voices, more resonant somehow. She tried to explain that she was with the diplomatic mission, but her Federation standard was still clumsy, and she stumbled over the words. Marcus listened patiently, then offered to help her find her way back to the delegation quarters. As they walked through the station's corridors, he pointed out various features and explained how the artificial gravity worked. Kira hung on every word, not just because she was genuinely curious, but because she found herself fascinated by this human who treated her with such casual kindness. Over the following weeks, as the diplomatic talks continued, Kira found excuses to seek out Marcus. She would slip away from her tutors and wander the maintenance sections until she found him. Sometimes she would simply sit quietly and watch him work. Other times she would ask endless questions about human technology and culture. Marcus seemed to enjoy her company, though he always maintained appropriate boundaries. He would share stories about Earth and the human colonies while working, and sometimes he would bring her small gifts like exotic fruits from the hydroponic gardens or interesting minerals from station's geology lab. It was during one of these informal visits that Kira realized what she was feeling. Marcus was explaining how human families worked, describing his own parents and siblings back on Mars. As he spoke, his face took on a soft expression that made Kira's heart race. She suddenly understood that what she felt for him was more than friendship or curiosity. It was love, or what her young mind interpreted as love. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She stood up, abruptly interrupting his story about his sister's wedding, and blurted out her feelings in a rush of badly pronounced Federation standard mixed with her native tongue. Marcus went very still. For a long moment he just looked at her, his brown eyes serious and kind. Then he sighed and knelt down so they were at eye level. "Kira, I understand what you're feeling," he said gently, "but you're very young and I'm an adult. What you're experiencing is normal, but it's not something that can happen between us. Not now, maybe not ever." She felt tears burn her eyes, an embarrassing display of emotion that only proved his point about her youth. But she managed to lift her chin and look at him directly. Then, when she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Finally, he reached out and touched her shoulder briefly. "Come back when you're older," he said. "When you've lived your life and seen the galaxy and decided this is still what you want. If that day comes, then we can talk about it as equals." The words were meant to be gentle, but they hit Kira like a physical blow. She nodded once, unable to speak, then turned and ran back to her quarters. She cried for hours that night, grieving for something she had never really had. The next day, the Altarian delegation departed. As their ship pulled away from the station, Kira pressed her face to the viewing port. and watched Jupiter shrink in the distance. She made a promise to herself that day that she would return. She would become the person Marcus had challenged her to become, and then she would come back. The years that followed were a blur of determined activity. Kira threw herself into her studies with an intensity that surprised her teachers. She learned Federation Standard until she spoke it as fluently as her native tongue. She studied human culture and history until she could discuss Earth literature and philosophy with any scholar. She trained in diplomacy and engineering and xenobiology, pushing herself to excel in every field. But more than that, she lived. She traveled to dozens of worlds, experiencing the wonders and dangers of the galaxy. She formed friendships and alliances. She faced down space pirates and negotiated trade agreements. She loved and lost and learned from every experience. Through it all, Marcus remained in her thoughts, not as an obsession, but as a guiding star. She carried the memory of his kindness and the challenge he had given her. She wanted to be worthy of that challenge, not just for him, but for herself. It took 15 years by Terran standard for Kira to feel ready to return. She was 29 cycles old now, a fully mature Altarian, and a respected diplomat in her own right. She had served on 3 different worlds and earned commendations for her work in interspecies relations. She had loved others and been loved in return, but none of those relationships had lasted. Something in her heart remained committed to the promise she had made to herself as a heartbroken child. When she finally returned to the Jupiter station, everything had changed. The facility had been expanded and modernized. Most of the staff she remembered were gone, transferred to other posts, or retired. But Marcus was still there, though he was no longer a junior engineer. He had risen through the ranks and now served as the station's chief of operations. He was 40 years old when she found him, and the years had been kind to him. His hair had touches of gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter and responsibility. But his hands were still steady, and his eyes still held that same depth that had first captivated her. He was in his office reviewing duty rosters when she knocked on his door. He looked up distractedly, and for a moment he didn't recognize her. Then his eyes widened and he stood up slowly. "Kira," he said, and her name sounded different and his voice richer somehow. "You came back." She stepped into the office and the door closed behind her. For a moment they simply looked at each other across the space of years and distance. "I told you I would," she said finally. "You said to come back when I was older, when I had lived my life and seen the galaxy. So here I am." Marcus moved around the desk to stand before her. He was still taller than her despite her people's natural height advantage. His eyes searched her face as if looking for traces of the girl he had known. "You have changed," he said softly. "I can see it in your eyes. You have become someone remarkable." She felt her hearts flutter the way they had all those years ago, but now it was different. This was not the desperate infatuation of a child, but something deeper and more substantial. She had tested this feeling against time and distance and other loves, and it had remained constant. "I need to tell you something, Marcus," she said. "I never forgot what you said to me that day. It became my guiding principle. I lived my life fully. I experienced joy and sorrow and adventure. I became who I was meant to be. But through it all, I never stopped loving you." Marcus reached out and touched her face gently. The gesture was tender and familiar, as if no time had passed at all. "I never forgot you either," he said. "I wondered sometimes if you would actually return. I hoped you would, but I also hoped you would find happiness elsewhere. I wanted you to be free to choose your own path." She leaned into his touch, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "And I did choose," she said. "I chose to love you not as a child infatuated with a stranger, but as a woman who knows her own heart. I chose to come back, not because I was obsessed with a memory, but because I genuinely believe we could build something beautiful together. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her cheek. Then he smiled the same warm smile she remembered from all those years ago. "Then perhaps it's time we had that conversation as equals," he said. What followed was not the fairy tale ending that the young Kira had imagined. Love, especially love across species and cultures, required work and compromise and patience. There were practical considerations to address and social barriers to navigate. Marcus had built a life during the years she was away, and she had responsibilities and commitments of her own. But they were both older now and wiser. They approached their relationship with the same careful attention that they brought to their professional work. They talked for hours about their hopes and fears and dreams. They learned about each other's worlds and cultures in ways that went far beyond the surface knowledge they had shared as strangers. Slowly, carefully, they built something together. It was not the desperate passion of youth, but something deeper and more enduring. They found ways to blend their different physiologies and lifespans. They created new traditions that honored both their heritage and their shared future. The galaxy watched their relationship with interest. It was not the first human-alien pairing, but it was perhaps the most public given their positions and the circumstances of their meeting. They became symbols of something larger than themselves, representatives of the possibility that love could transcend species and culture and time. But for them, it was simpler than that. They had found in each other not just love, but partnership. They were equals in every way that mattered to people who had chosen to walk through life together, despite the obstacles and differences that might have kept them apart. Years later, when young beings of various species would ask them about their love story, they would tell them the same thing Marcus had told Kira all those years ago. Live your life fully, experience everything the galaxy has to offer, become who you are meant to be. And then if love finds you, embrace it with the wisdom that comes from having truly lived. It was perhaps the most human advice an alien could give, and perhaps that was fitting for a love story that had begun with a human teaching an alien girl that the best things in life were worth waiting for. The galaxy continued to turn, and new challenges arose: wars and peace treaties, and first contacts with previously unknown species. Marcus and Kira faced them all together, two beings who had learned that love transcended not just species but time itself. They had proven that sometimes the best answer to love at first sight is to wait for love at second sight, when both parties have become worthy of what they hope to build together. In the end, their story became legend not because it was a fairy tale, but because it was real. Two beings from different worlds who found in each other not just love, but the possibility of becoming better than they could be alone. It was a very human story and a very alien one, and perhaps that was what made it perfect.